Jerome Whitfield was 38 years old, and until that Tuesday evening, he believed he was building something that would last. He was a master electrician who had wired his own home with his own hands. Every circuit, every switch, every room a product of his labor. His wife Adrienne was a corporate marketing director, polished and ambitious, and Jerome had never once resented her success. He was proud of her. He trusted her completely. That evening, Jerome went to retrieve her dry cleaning from her car. An ordinary errand on an ordinary night. But when he picked up her phone from the seat, the message already on the screen stopped him cold. It was addressed to someone saved only as P. It read, "I can't wait to actually wake up next to you. 3 more days." Jerome Whitfield set the phone down. He took the dry cleaning inside. He hung it carefully in her closet. And then he stood in the kitchen of the home he had built with his bare hands and made a decision his wife never saw coming. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The kitchen smelled like coffee and cedar. Jerome Whitfield stood at the counter, mug in both hands, watching the morning light crawl across the hardwood floors. He had refinished those floors himself. 3 weekends, a rented sander, and a bad back for a month afterward. Every time the light hit them right, that warm, honey-gold color just after sunrise, he remembered exactly why he did it. He ran a hand along the edge of the counter. Solid oak. He had built these cabinets from scratch, cutting each panel in the garage, sanding them until his palms were raw. The tiles behind the stove were gray slate, each one set by hand over a long 4th of July weekend 4 years ago. The recessed lighting above the island, his own work, obviously. Every wire in this house had run through his fingers at some point. He loved this house the way some men love a good tool, not just for what it looked like, for what it had taken to make it right. Jerome took a slow sip of coffee and let the quiet settle around him. He was a big man, broad through the chest, hands that looked like they were built for exactly the work they did. He kept his head close-cropped and his face clean-shaved on weekdays. He was 38 years old and had been running his own electrical contracting business for 11 years. Whitfield Electric started as a single truck, borrowed tools, and one commercial client who had taken a chance on a 27-year-old who spoke carefully and showed up when he said he would. Now he had 6 full-time crew members, a second truck, and more referrals than he could take. His name meant something in this city. Not flashy, just solid, just right. He set his mug down and checked his phone. 2 texts from his foreman, Marcus, a question about conduit specs on the warehouse job they were finishing downtown. Jerome typed back a clean answer in under 30 seconds. That was how his mind worked. He saw problems as systems. He found the fault. He fixed it. He moved on. He heard Adrienne moving upstairs. He refilled his coffee. She came down 10 minutes later, already dressed for work. Navy blazer, hair pinned smooth, heels clicking against the stairs. She looked polished, the way she always did, put together in a way Jerome had always admired, even when he couldn't fully name it. She was beautiful. There was no question about that. Sharp eyes, a smile that could open a room right up. She had built her career on that combination, and she was good at what she did. "Morning," she said. "Morning." He gestured toward the coffee pot. She poured a travel cup, snapped the lid, and checked something on her phone. She did not sit down. She used to sit down for coffee. They used to sit together for 15 or 20 minutes before the day took them in different directions. He had noticed when that stopped. He wasn't sure she had. "Late night again?" she asked, eyes still on the phone. "Got home around 9? You were already in." She nodded like that answered something. "I was tired." She had been tired a lot lately. He watched her move through the kitchen, the small adjustments she made, the way she stood slightly angled toward the door, Her weight already shifted toward leaving. He filed it away the same way he filed everything. Without judgment, without rush, just noting it. "Have a good day," she said. "You too." The front door closed. Her car backed out of the driveway. Jerome stood in the kitchen she never helped renovate, in the house she never helped build, and finished his coffee. That evening, Adrienne called to say she was grabbing dinner with a coworker and would be home late. She texted instead of called. He noticed that too. He spent the evening doing invoices at the kitchen table, the way he did most nights she wasn't home. He ate leftovers standing at the counter. He was not lonely, exactly, but he was aware of the shape that a person leaves when they stop filling a space. She came home at 9:30, kissed him on the cheek, went upstairs. He stayed at the table another hour, working. The dry cleaning had been sitting in her car for 3 days. She had mentioned it twice and forgotten to bring it in both times. On Thursday morning, while she was in the shower, Jerome took her keys off the hook and walked out to the driveway. He popped her door open, reached across the back seat for the plastic-wrapped garments. Her phone was on the passenger seat, unlocked, screen still lit. He wasn't looking for anything. He never had been. The message thread was open. The contact name at the top was just one letter, P. The last message, sent from Adrienne's number, read, "I can't wait to actually wake up next to you. 3 more days." Jerome looked at it for a long moment. Then he picked up the dry cleaning, closed her car door, and walked back inside. He hung the garments carefully in her closet, smoothing the plastic so nothing wrinkled. Then he went back to the kitchen and picked up his coffee. He did not cry. He did not break anything. He became very still. Jerome was already awake when Adrienne's alarm went off at 6:15. He had not slept much. He had lain beside her in the dark with his eyes open and his breathing even, and he had not moved. Not once. She had slept fine. He listened to the soft rhythm of it for hours. Now he stood at the counter and poured 2 cups of coffee. Same as always. She came downstairs looking exactly like herself. Navy wrap dress today. Hair down. She took her mug and checked her phone, and stood at the island with her weight tilted toward the door. Same as always. "You sleep okay?" she asked. "Fine," Jerome said. "You?" "Really well, actually." She smiled at him. It was a real smile. That was the part that stayed with him after she left. Not the lie, but how easy it was for her to deliver it while looking right at him. "Have a good day," she said. "You too." He watched her car back down the driveway. He watched it reach the end of the street. He watched it turn and disappear. And then he stood there another 30 seconds, making sure. Then he sat down at the kitchen table, opened his laptop, and went to work. The shared cloud account had been Adrienne's idea 3 years ago. She wanted one place where they could both store documents, receipts, photos, tax stuff, she said. Travel record. Jerome had set it up in under an hour. She had logged in a few times in the beginning and then, as far as he knew, forgotten about it. As far as she knew, so had he. He opened the photo folder. There were hundreds of images, most of them ordinary. Vacation pictures, holiday dinners, a few folders Jerome recognized from trips they'd taken together. But one folder had no label, just a date range. He clicked it. The first image loaded slowly. A hotel lobby. Marble floors, low amber lighting, a modern front desk in the background. Jerome didn't recognize the hotel. He looked at the file data on the side of the screen. The timestamp put it at 14 months ago, a Tuesday. The folder had 61 photos in it. He went through every one. Hotel lobbies, restaurants with candlelit tables and wine glasses catching the light, a pier somewhere, water in the background, late afternoon gold. Adrienne laughing in one of them, her head tilted back, looking more relaxed than Jerome had seen her look in over a year. And in several of them, partially visible, a man. Jerome opened a new browser tab. It took him less than 20 minutes. LinkedIn. The company page for Adrienne's firm. Senior leadership team. Patrick Outsid, Senior Vice President of Strategy. The headshot was professional and crisp. A trim man in his mid-40s, dark suit, the easy expression of someone accustomed to being photographed. Jerome looked at the face. He matched it to the figure in the photos without difficulty. He went back to the cloud folder. He checked the metadata on every image, writing nothing down yet, just reading. The first photo was 14 months ago. The most recent was 11 days ago. 14 months. Not a mistake. Not a moment of weakness that spiraled. 14 months of dinners and hotels and weekend trips, while she came home and ate at the table he built, and slept in the house he wired, and smiled at him over coffee mugs he picked out himself. Jerome closed the laptop. He sat for a moment with his hands flat on the table. He pressed his palms down against the wood. Solid. Real. Still. Then he picked up his phone and called his brother. Darius answered on the second ring. Hey, what's up? I need a name, Jerome said. Best divorce attorney in the city. Someone who handles complicated financial cases, not just straightforward splits. A pause. Short. Darius knew better than to ask a string of questions when Jerome used that tone. Give me an hour, Darius said. Thank you. He hung up and went to take a shower. He had a crew showing up at 7:30 and a full day on the warehouse job. He was not going to miss a single hour of it. Adrienne brought it up over dinner, casually, the way she said most things lately, tossed out lightly, like it was barely worth mentioning. I'm going to do a girls' weekend with Beverly and a few people from work, she said, cutting into her chicken. Leaving Thursday, back Sunday. Jerome took a sip of water. Sounds good. Just some time to decompress. She moved food around her plate. Work's been a lot. She did not look up while she said it. He noticed that too. The way her eyes stayed on the plate just a few seconds longer than they needed to. You should go, he said. You could use the break. She looked up then and smiled. Yeah? I think it'll be good. He smiled back. At 1 a.m, Jerome sat at his desk in the small home office off the hallway, with the door pulled most of the way shut. The house was quiet. Adrienne had gone to bed at 10. The phone rang twice before she picked up. Patricia Wade. Miss Wade, my name is Jerome Whitfield. My brother Darius gave me your number. I'm sorry for the hour. Don't be. Her voice was alert, professional, unbothered. Tell me what you have. So he did. He laid it out in order. The message on the phone, the cloud storage, Patrick Outsid, the 14 months of photographs. He told her about the joint accounts, the patterns his gut was telling him were wrong, the fact that Adrienne had always managed more of the household finances than he'd scrutinized closely. He spoke without breaking, without raising his voice, just facts, delivered in sequence. When he finished, Patricia was quiet for 2 seconds. Gather every document you can access, she said. Account statements, tax records, anything in your name or jointly held. Going back at least 2 years. Understood. How much time do you have before she's back? Jerome looked at the clock on his desk. Then he looked at the wall. The one he had drywalled and painted himself. The one that held this room together. 3 days, he said. Thursday morning came in cold and gray. Jerome was already dressed when Adrienne rolled her suitcase down the hallway. He was sitting at the kitchen island with his coffee, scrolling through nothing on his phone. She came around the corner looking put together. Black travel pants, a cream blouse, her hair pulled back clean. The suitcase was a navy blue hardshell. Mid-sized. He had never seen it before. He noticed that. He filed it without comment. You're up early, she said. Early job, he said. Warehouse rewire. She nodded and set the suitcase by the door and poured herself a half-cup of coffee. She drank it, standing up, leaning against the counter, looking at her phone. Her nails were freshly done, a soft rose color. He noticed that, too. I'll text you when we get there, she said. "Drive safe," he said. She came around the island and kissed him on the cheek. Her lips were warm. She smelled like the same perfume she'd worn for 3 years. She pulled her suitcase to the front door, opened it, and stepped out into the gray morning without looking back. Jerome stayed at the island until he heard the ride-share door close. Then he walked to the window and watched the car pull away from the curb and move down the street. He watched it reach the stop sign. He watched it turn left and disappear. He picked up his phone and called Darius. Patricia Wade's office was on the 14th floor of a glass building downtown. She was shorter than Jerome expected, with close-cropped gray hair and reading glasses pushed up on her head. She shook his hand once, firm, and pointed him to the chair across from her desk. She didn't waste time. "You're home," she said, opening a folder. "You purchased it before the marriage. Sole title, your name only." "Correct." "Renovations were funded how?" "Business income. All of it. I have the contractor receipts, the permits, the bank records showing the draws came from my business account." Patricia made a note. She contributed nothing to the renovation, nothing financial. She picked out some fixtures. "Good." She clicked her pen. "That's a clean position." Her contributions to the household during the marriage were primarily her own living expenses. Mortgage she was already benefiting from as a resident, groceries, shared utilities. She is going to argue those salary contributions entitle her to a portion of the property. My job is to show the court that argument doesn't hold. Can you? She looked at him over the top of her glasses. Yes. Phyllis Okafor's office was smaller and warmer. Framed prints on the walls, stacks of organized folders on every surface, a space heater humming beside her desk. She and Jerome had worked together since his 3rd year in business. She knew his finances the way a doctor knows a patient's chart. Every number, every shift, every anomaly. She pulled up the joint account records on her screen and turned the monitor slightly toward him. "Here," she said, tapping the screen with one finger. "And here, and here. Small transfers, irregular amounts, never the same number twice." "How far back?" Jerome asked. "Far as I can see right now, almost 2 years. But I want to go through everything before I give you a full picture." She turned and looked at him directly. "Jerome, these are not random. The timing, the amounts, the pattern. Someone was being careful." He looked at the screen for a long moment. "Keep digging," he said. "I will," she said. "Give me until Monday." Saturday, Jerome and Darius worked steadily through the house. They did not rush. They did not throw anything. Jerome had bought a set of matching storage boxes Thursday evening. The kind with lids, stackable, clean. Every item got folded or wrapped. Clothes hung on the portable rack Darius brought from his car. Shoes in their boxes. Toiletries sealed in Ziploc bags. Books stacked flat. Darius packed mostly in silence. Once, near the back of the closet, he found a box of old photos. Jerome and Adrienne on vacation somewhere, early in the marriage, and he set it on the bed, without comment. Jerome looked at it for a second. Then he placed it in the stack with everything else. By 4 in the afternoon, the boxes were on the front porch, lined up neatly against the railing, labeled clearly. Jerome stood in the empty bedroom doorway and looked at the space she used to occupy. Nothing was broken. Nothing was ruined. He went downstairs and made dinner. Sunday morning, Jerome sat at the kitchen table with his coffee and opened his phone. He typed a message to Beverly Cross. "Hey, Beverly. Hope you and Adrienne are having a good time." She seemed like she really needed the break. He sent it and set the phone face up on the table. He did not have to wait long. "Hey, Jerome. I actually haven't talked to Adrienne in like 2 weeks. Is everything okay?" Jerome read it twice. He took a screenshot. He saved it to the folder he'd been building since Monday. Then he stood, rinsed his mug, and went to get dressed. The envelope Patricia had messengered Saturday evening was taped to the front door, flat and white and impossible to miss. Jerome had placed it there himself that morning before Beverly replied. He heard the rideshare before he saw it. He was in the front room, standing beside the window, when the car turned onto the street. He watched it slow. He watched Adrian look through the passenger window and go still. He watched her open the door and step out and stand on the sidewalk, looking at the boxes. She stood there for a moment, just looking. Jerome opened the front door before she reached the steps. He was wearing the gray dress shirt she had always liked and a dark pair of slacks. His face was composed, rested. His hands were loose at his sides. Adrian's eyes went to him, then to the boxes, then back to him. "Jerome, you've been served," he said. The envelope was already gone from the door. She had seen it, he could tell, had already registered what it was. Her lips parted. "Jerome, let me—" "Beverly didn't know about any girls' trip, Adrian." His voice was level, quiet. "I texted her Sunday morning." She went very still on the bottom step. Jerome stepped back inside and pulled the door shut behind him. Clean, quiet. The latch caught with a soft, final click. The folder sat between them like a quiet accusation. Phyllis had not touched her coffee since she poured it. Jerome's cup was equally forgotten. The only sound in the small office was the space heater and the faint hum of traffic 14 stories below them. Phyllis opened the folder. 24 months, she said. Consistent. Methodical. She slid the first page toward him. "I went through everything. Joint checking, joint savings, the linked accounts. These transfers were never random. They looked random, but they weren't." She tapped the page with her finger. The amounts changed every time. $112, $340, $87. Never the same number twice. Never round figures. Harder to notice that way. Jerome looked at the column of numbers. Neat. Orderly. 2 years of quiet theft laid out in rows. "Where did they go?" he asked. "A private account." Phyllis pulled out a second page. "Not a joint account. Not a business account. A private savings account opened in her name only." She slid it across. "I found the receiving institution through the routing numbers on the transfers. It's traceable. All of it." Jerome was quiet for a moment. "How much total?" Phyllis looked at him steadily. $47,000. The number sat in the air between them like something physical. Jerome did not move. He looked at the page. He looked at the total printed at the bottom. Clean and unambiguous. $47,000 moved in small pieces over 2 years, while he was out bidding jobs and managing crews and building the business that funded the very accounts she was quietly draining. "The timing," he said. "You mentioned it was deliberate." "Very." Phyllis pulled out a third page, a calendar-style chart she had built herself. Each transfer date marked in red. "These clusters here, February, July, October each year. Those are your heaviest billing months, when you're pulling 12-hour days and your phone doesn't stop, when you're the least likely to sit down and read through a bank statement line by line." She set the chart down. "Whoever timed these knew your schedule." Jerome looked at the chart. He thought about coming home from a February job, cold, tired, hands raw, and sitting at that kitchen table while Adrienne made dinner and asked about his day. He thought about how easy it would have been for her to open an app on her phone and move $300 while he was in the shower. He thought about 14 months. Then he thought about 24. He picked up his phone and called Patricia. She answered on the second ring. "I'm sitting with my accountant," Jerome said. "She's documented $47,000 in transfers from our joint savings to a private account Adrian opened alone. 24 months. Time to my busiest billing cycles." A brief pause. "Is the documentation traceable?" Patricia asked. "Completely." "Then we have a marital asset dissipation claim," Patricia said. He could hear her already moving, already thinking 3 steps ahead. "That changes the shape of this case significantly. Bring me everything your accountant has, originals and copies. I want it by Wednesday." "You'll have it Tuesday." Jerome said. He ended the call, looked at Phyllis, and nodded once. She closed the folder and slid it across the desk to him. "I made you 2 copies," she said quietly. "One for the attorney. One you keep." He drove home through mid-morning traffic, the folder on the passenger seat. The house looked the same from the street. Red brick, the new porch railing he'd installed last spring, the oak tree in the front yard dropping leaves across the walk. He pulled into the driveway and sat in the truck for a moment, engine off, looking at it. Then he went inside. He moved slowly through each room. Not with grief, not sentiment. He stood in the kitchen and looked at the cabinets he'd hung himself. Level, plumb, every door aligned. He walked through the living room and pressed one hand briefly against the fireplace surround he'd reframed during the second winter. He stood in the doorway of the bedroom and looked at the floor he'd refinished himself, sanded down 3 times to get the grain right. She was not in any of it. She never had been, really. He understood that now. He had built this place the way he built everything. Carefully, with intention, with the expectation that it would hold, and she had stood inside it and calculated what it was worth to her. He was still standing in it. She was not. Jerome went to the kitchen, filled a glass of water, and stood at the window looking out at the backyard. His phone rang. The name on the screen read, Patrick Outsid. Jerome looked at it for 1 full ring. 2. He set his glass down. Then he answered, Jerome. The voice was smooth, warm in the practiced way of someone accustomed to managing a room. "I think we both know this situation has become unnecessarily complicated. You seem like a reasonable man, dignified. I'd imagine you'd rather handle this privately, move forward with your life, than let things get drawn out and messy for everyone involved." Jerome said nothing. He listened. Patrick filled the silence easily, the way men like him always did, comfortable in the sound of their own voice, unbothered by the quiet on the other end. When he finished, Jerome spoke. "Thank you for calling me directly, Patrick," he said. "My attorney will note that you made contact." He hung up. He stood there for 1 second. Then he called Darius. "I need you to find out everything about Patrick Outsid's employment contract," he said. "Specifically, whether it includes a morality clause or any policy on intra-company relationships." The call came Wednesday morning, while Jerome was in the driveway checking the oil on his truck. He didn't recognize the number at first. Then he did. "Jerome." Beverly's voice was careful, tight in a way that told him she had been working up to this for a while. "I need to talk to you. In person, if that's okay. There are things I should have said sooner." He wiped his hands on a shop rag and leaned against the truck. "You know where I live," he said. She arrived at noon. Beverly Cross looked like someone who hadn't been sleeping well. She was put together. Blazer, earrings, the kind of careful appearance that said she'd tried, but her eyes carried the weight of someone who had been sitting with something heavy for a long time. Gloria was already at the house. She'd come by that morning with a container of soup and a bag of groceries, the way she always did when something serious was happening in her son's life. She didn't announce it as concern. She just showed up and started moving around the kitchen. And Jerome had let her, because that was how they had always operated. When Beverly came through the front door, Gloria greeted her quietly, poured a glass of water without being asked, and set it on the table in front of her. Then she moved back toward the kitchen counter and picked up her dish towel and kept her hands busy. Jerome sat across from Beverly. Beverly wrapped both hands around the water glass and looked at the table for a moment. Then she looked up at him. "I didn't know at the beginning," she said. "I want you to understand that. When it started, whatever was happening between her and Patrick, she never told me directly. Not at first." Jerome said nothing. He waited. "About 6 months ago, she came to me." Beverly's jaw tightened slightly. "She said she was considering her options, that she was setting things up. I assumed she meant she was thinking about leaving the marriage. having a hard time. I didn't push. I told myself it wasn't my place. She paused. I should have pushed. What did she tell you? Jerome asked. Beverly took a breath. Patrick has been quietly funding a boutique marketing firm. Small operation, selective clients. The kind of thing that looks understated on the outside but moves real money. She looked at him steadily. Adrienne was going to be a named partner. That was the plan. She would come in with a capital contribution, her own investment in the firm, and Patrick would bring the infrastructure and the client list. The kitchen was completely still. Her contribution, Jerome said. His voice was level. Where was that coming from? Beverly pressed her lips together. I didn't know the specifics. Not then. She shook her head slowly. It wasn't until a few weeks ago, after the Sunday she came home and found her things, that I started thinking about the timeline. What she said. How long she'd been setting things up. And I did the math. Her voice dropped. Jerome, I think the money she was putting into that firm was yours. The number sat in his head, clean and precise. $47,000. Moved in small, careful pieces over 2 years, timed to his busiest months, not just a private account. A down payment on a future she had been quietly purchasing while he was out building the very business that funded it. He hadn't just been left. He had been used. He thought about the February nights, the 12-hour days, coming home with his hands raw and the smell of job sites still on him, sitting at the table in this kitchen, this exact kitchen, while she asked about his day and moved money from his account on her phone. He breathed in slowly, then out. Thank you for telling me, he said. I should have told you sooner. Beverly's voice cracked slightly on the last word. She steadied it. I kept telling myself I didn't know enough, that I wasn't certain, but the truth is, I was trying to protect a friendship, and I let that go on longer than it should have. She looked at him directly. That wasn't right. I'm sorry. Jerome nodded once. He didn't offer her absolution, and he didn't withhold it. He simply received it, the way a man receives information he already suspected, but needed confirmed. From the kitchen doorway, there was a soft sound, a single, quiet movement. Gloria had set down her dish towel. She didn't say anything. She didn't move into the room. She simply stood there in the doorway with her hands at her sides, looking at nothing in particular, the way a woman looks when she is holding something too large to put into words. Beverly didn't stay long after that. She said she hoped things went the way they should. Jerome walked her to the door and thanked her again, and then the house was quiet. He came back to the kitchen. Gloria was already at the table, sitting across from where he'd been. She had refilled both cups from the pot on the counter. She looked at her son the way she had always looked at him, like someone who knew exactly who he was and wasn't the least bit surprised he was still standing. How are you? She asked. Jerome sat down. He looked at his coffee. I'm clear, he said. Gloria nodded. She reached across and refilled his cup. The filing came on a Tuesday. Patricia called Jerome at 7:15 in the morning, before he had finished his first cup of coffee. She didn't waste time on preamble. Adrienne's attorney filed an asset claim late yesterday, she said. They're arguing her salary contributions to the household entitled her to a portion of the marital assets you accumulated during the marriage. They're going after the business equity and the renovation value on the home. Jerome set his cup down. How strong is it? He asked. It isn't. Patricia's voice carried the flat confidence of someone who had already read the filing twice and found exactly what she expected to find. They're making a reasonable-sounding argument built on a weak foundation. I'll walk you through it. He was at her office by 9. The conference room was small and clean. A round table, 2 chairs, a window that looked out over the parking structure next door. Patricia had a legal pad in front of her, and the filing printed and tabbed in 3 places. She walked him through it without drama. The home was purchased in Jerome's name alone, 18 months before the marriage. The title had never been amended. The renovation, 4 years of work, every material, every subcontractor, every hour of Jerome's own labor, was funded entirely through his business income. There was no joint contribution to either the purchase or the improvement of the property. Adrienne's financial presence in the household had covered her own portion of living expenses, groceries, her car note, her wardrobe, the things a person pays for when they live somewhere. "She didn't build anything here," Patricia said, tapping the tabbed page. "Her attorney knows that. This is a pressure filing. They want you to feel the weight of it and decide it's easier to give her something than fight." Jerome looked at the filing. He had read through half of it in the waiting area before Patricia called him in. "They miscalculated," he said. "Yes," Patricia said simply. "They did." The call from Darius came that same afternoon, while Jerome was driving back from a job site in the east part of the city. "I've got it," Darius said. He didn't bother with a greeting. He knew when his brother needed information and not conversation. Adrienne's company has a conduct policy. Clear language. Employees in roles with supervisory adjacent influence over another employee's performance are prohibited from maintaining a personal relationship with that employee. Jerome merged onto the highway and kept his eyes ahead. "And Patrick participated in her review," he said. It wasn't a question. Her most recent performance review, Darius confirmed, documented. He was listed as a contributing evaluator. A pause. "Jerome, this isn't gray area. The policy is plain." Jerome was quiet for a moment. The highway stretched out in front of him, flat, straight, unhurried. "Save everything," he said. "All of it. I'll let you know when." Darius didn't push. That was the thing about his brother. He had learned, over years of watching Jerome work, that the man never moved before the right moment, and he always knew when the right moment was. Adrienne was staying at the Harrington Hotel on the North Side, in a room Patrick's corporate account was covering. Jerome knew this because Patricia had confirmed her address of record for service purposes, and because Darius had mentioned it with the kind of careful neutrality that meant he was furious on Jerome's behalf and choosing not to say so. She had told at least 2 people she was handling herself fine, that she had options, that Jerome was struggling, that the man was clearly unraveling without her and would settle quickly just to make the whole thing stop. Jerome, that same week, signed a contract extension with a municipal infrastructure client that would represent the strongest revenue quarter in his company's history. He hired a second crew lead. He reviewed the documents Phyllis had prepared and signed off on a quarterly filing that looked cleaner than anything he'd filed in 2 years, now that the joint accounts were no longer part of the picture. He came home each evening to a house that was quiet in the way he had decided to accept. Not empty, but his. The call came on Friday afternoon. Patricia's number lit up Jerome's phone while he was at the kitchen table going over project specs. He answered it and waited. "They made an offer," Patricia said. She read him the number. It was low. It was structured around the assumption that he was tired, that he was hurting, that he was the kind of man who would take the path of least resistance if it meant the thing would simply end. Jerome listened to the whole offer. He let the silence sit for a moment after Patricia finished. Then he picked up the document she had messaged through earlier and looked at it. He set it flat on the table. His coffee was to the left. His phone was in his right hand. The kitchen was still. "Tell them no," he said. "And tell them we're prepared to present the full dissipation documentation at the next hearing." Patricia said she would. The counteroffer was withdrawn before the week ended. The suit was charcoal gray with a faint structure to the shoulders. Nothing flashy, nothing borrowed. Jerome had bought it on a Wednesday afternoon, 2 weeks after Adrienne left, at a store he had driven past for years without stopping. The salesman had measured him twice and told him the fit was already close to perfect. Jerome had said thank you and paid cash. He buttoned it now in front of the bathroom mirror, the same mirror he had mounted himself, level and flush, On a wall he had drywalled and painted. He straightened the collar. He looked like himself, just the version of himself that had stopped waiting for someone else to believe in him. He picked up his keys from the counter and left. Patricia's building was downtown, 12 floors of glass and steel that caught the morning sun and threw it back at the street. Jerome parked in the structure across the block and walked. The air was cool and thin. His shoes sounded even on the pavement. He was not nervous. He noticed that. He checked for nerves the way he checked a panel for heat. Careful, methodical, and found nothing running too hot. Patricia met him in the lobby at 8:45. "You look ready," she said. "I am," Jerome said. She nodded and led him to the elevator. The conference room was on the 9th floor. Long table, padded chairs, a credenza along one wall with a coffee setup Jerome didn't touch. A window at the far end showed a slice of the city skyline. Jerome chose his seat, left side of the table, facing the door, and set his phone face down in front of him. Adrienne arrived 7 minutes later with her attorney, a broad-shouldered man named Clifton, who carried himself with the confidence of someone who billed by the quarter hour and knew it. Adrienne was in a dark blazer and pearl earrings Jerome recognized. Her hair was pulled back. She was composed. She had prepared for this the same way she prepared for everything: controlled surface, managed expression, nothing given away for free. She sat across from Jerome and did not look at him immediately. When she did, it lasted less than a second. Then her eyes moved to Patricia. Jerome watched her do it. He understood what she was looking for, some sign that he was what she had told herself he was: hurt, disorganized, running on emotion. She had built a strategy around that version of him. She had told her attorney to expect that version. She had probably told Patrick that version was what would walk through the door today. What walked through the door was a man in a suit she had never seen, sitting with his hands flat and still on the table, waiting without urgency for something that was already decided. She looked at him once more, briefly, and something small shifted in her jaw. Patricia moved through the opening documents with clean efficiency. She established the property record, the title, the renovation costs drawn from Jerome's business accounts, subcontractor invoices, materials receipts, payroll records. Clifton raised 2 objections. Patricia addressed both without raising her voice or her pace. Jerome did not speak. He did not need to. Then Patricia opened the second folder. "I'm now introducing documentation regarding the dissipation of marital assets," she said. She slid the summary page toward Clifton. $47,000 in transfers from the joint savings account, executed over 24 months, into a private account held solely in Adrienne Whitfield's name. The transfers are traced, timed, and documented. We have the full transaction history. Clifton looked at the page. He looked at Adrienne. Jerome watched Adrienne's face stay still. She was good at that. She had practiced that. But there was something happening behind the stillness, a quiet recalculation, fast and private, like a system rerouting after a blown fuse. Clifton set the page down and straightened in his chair. "We'd like to request a brief recess." "Of course," Patricia said. Jerome took his water cup into the hallway and stood near the window at the end of the corridor. The city moved below him. A delivery truck idling at a light. A woman in a yellow coat walking fast. The ordinary world, carrying on the way it always did, indifferent to what was being settled 9 floors above it. He drank his water. He checked the time. He thought about the crew at the East Side job. They were pulling wire through the main conduit today. Work he trusted them to handle. He thought about whether he had ground coffee left at home or whether he needed to stop on the way back. The recess took 11 minutes. When Jerome returned to the table, Adrienne was already seated. Clifton was looking at his notepad. Patricia was looking at Jerome with the practiced neutrality of someone who had won this round and was simply waiting for the other side to acknowledge it formally. Jerome sat down. Adrienne looked at him then. Not the quick, measuring look from before. This was slower. Something had gone out of it. Not the composure, she still had that, but the certainty behind it. The quiet assumption that she had known who she was dealing with. She was looking at him now like she wasn't sure. Like she was meeting him, maybe, for the first time. He drove himself home afterward. He hung the suit in the closet, smoothed the jacket flat on its hanger, and changed into a worn gray shirt and the jeans he wore on light days. He washed his hands at the kitchen sink and stood at the counter for a moment, deciding. He made rice and chicken. Simple, nothing complicated, and ate at the table where Beverly had sat, where Gloria had refilled his coffee, where the divorce papers had sat in their envelope before everything became what it was now. He did not turn the television on. The kitchen was quiet. The house was quiet. Outside, the evening settled slowly over the neighborhood. Porch lights coming on, a dog somewhere barking twice and stopping. Jerome finished his dinner and sat for a while with his hands around a glass of water. The silence was not heavy. It asked nothing of him. It did not require him to perform or explain or hold anything together. It was his, all of it, the quiet and the house and the table and the chair beneath him. He sat in it and let it be enough. Patricia sent the request on a Tuesday. 2 sentences, formal, no explanations offered. Adrienne agreed by Wednesday afternoon. Jerome had expected she would. She was still trying to read him, still searching for the version of him she understood. She probably thought a private conversation meant she had one more chance to shape the story, one more room where she could manage the impression she made. She had not yet learned that he was done letting her manage anything. Gloria's house smelled the same way it always had, pot roast and lemon wood polish, and something warm underneath both, the particular smell of a home that had been loved inconsistently for decades, without interruption. Jerome arrived an hour early. Gloria fed him without asking if he was hungry. A plate of food, a glass of water, set down in front of him without ceremony. He ate at the kitchen table while she moved around him, unhurried. "You don't have to stay," Jerome said. "I know," Gloria said, and kept moving. He didn't ask again. Adrienne knocked at 2 o'clock exactly. Jerome was already seated at the dining room table. The long one, the one that had held a decade of Sunday dinners, Christmas plates, birthday cakes, the ordinary and recurring business of a family that showed up for itself. The table where Adrienne had sat beside him so many times she had probably stopped seeing it. He wanted her to see it today. Gloria answered the door. Whatever passed between them in the entryway was brief and quiet. Then Adrienne stepped into the dining room, still in her work coat, and stopped. She looked at the table, at Jerome, already seated, at the room around her. She sat down across from him without speaking. Jerome let the silence hold for a moment, not to unsettle her, not to perform patience. He simply wanted to begin when he was ready. And he wasn't ready yet. He looked at her, really looked, the way he hadn't permitted himself to since the front porch, and he let himself register, plainly and without flinching, who was sitting across from him. Then he was ready. "I found your phone in the car," he said. "October 14th. You had left it unlocked on the seat when I went to get your dry cleaning. There was a thread open, labeled P. He said it evenly, no performance in his voice, just the facts delivered in order. The last message said you couldn't wait to wake up next to him, that you had 3 more days. Adrienne's hands were folded on the table. She did not move them. The next morning, I opened the shared cloud, the one you asked me to set up. He paused. Not for effect, to remember. The photos weren't hard to find. You never deleted them. Hotel lobbies, restaurants, Patrick O.C., Senior VP of Strategy. Your company's LinkedIn made the identification easy. He kept his voice level. The metadata told me the rest. 14 months, Adrienne. Not a mistake. Not a moment. 14 months of decisions. Something moved across her face. Not guilt, exactly. More like the recognition of a number she had hoped would never be said out loud. Phyllis found the account, Jerome continued. $47,000. 24 months of transfers, time to my busiest billing cycles. You knew when I'd be least likely to look at the statements. He said it without accusation in his tone. Just the fact, placed on the table between them like a document entered into evidence. You weren't just leaving. You were building a way out. And you were building it with my money. Adrienne opened her mouth. Jerome kept going. Beverly came to see me. She told me about the firm. Patrick's venture. Your capital contribution. He watched her face change. The faint tightening around her eyes that meant she hadn't known Beverly had come. And Patrick called me directly, the day after Phyllis's meeting. I let him finish his whole speech. Jerome almost smiled. Not with warmth, with the particular satisfaction of a man who had held every card quietly for weeks. Then I thanked him for making contact and called my attorney. The room was very still. Adrienne looked at her hands, then back at him. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than he expected. Some of the Polish had gone out of it. How are you so calm? Jerome looked at her steadily. Because you don't get my anger, he said. You don't get my grief. You don't get anything from me anymore except what the court requires. He let that sit. Then, you thought I was the ceiling, Adrienne. I was the foundation. He said it without cruelty, without heat. Just the plain truth of it, spoken by a man who had known it for some time. And you didn't notice the difference until it was too late. He pushed back his chair and stood. Gloria was at the door with his coat already in hand. Jerome took it from her, and their eyes met for a moment. She said nothing. She didn't need to. He walked out first. The drive home took 14 minutes. He pulled into his driveway, cut the engine, and sat for a moment in the quiet of the car. The porch light was on. He had left it on before he left. Warm against the dark. His front door, his lock. The house he built waiting exactly where he had left it. He got out. He walked up the path. He put his key in the lock. He stepped inside. And then, standing in the entryway of his home, in the quiet, in the warmth, in the place no one had taken from him, Jerome Whitfield exhaled for the first time in weeks. The folder Phyllis slid across her desk was thinner than the last one. That was the point. Clean, she said, tapping the cover once with 2 fingers. Everything settled, everything documented, and everything that was yours is still yours. Jerome opened it. He read slowly, the way he read any document that mattered. Line by line, no skimming, no assumptions. Phyllis let him. She refilled her own coffee and waited, because she had known Jerome long enough to know that rushing him through something he was reading carefully was a waste of everyone's time. The judgment was thorough. The dissipation documentation Phyllis had built, all 24 months of it, every transfer traced and time-stamped, had landed exactly the way Patricia said it would. Adrienne's attorneys had tried to reframe it twice. Both times, the paper trail made the argument impossible. The $47,000 was fully accounted for in the final settlement, folding back into Jerome's column with legal clarity that left no room for appeal. The aggressive filing about marital asset contributions had gone nowhere. The house was titled in his name. The renovations were funded through his business income alone. Adrienne's attorneys had pushed, and Patricia had simply opened the documentation and waited for them to stop. They had stopped. Jerome closed the folder and set it on the edge of the desk. Business accounts look good too, Phyllis said. She pulled up a second sheet, his contracting business, clean of the joint filing complexity that had tangled his reporting for years. Adrienne's income, her deductions, the shared accounts that required reconciling every quarter. All of it gone now. What was left was simple and strong. Revenue up. Overhead steady. Profit margin the best it had been in 4 years. You were carrying extra weight, Phyllis said, not unkindly, just factually, the way she said everything. It doesn't show until it's gone. Jerome looked at the numbers. He nodded once. "Thank you, Phyllis," he said. "For all of it." She waved a hand. "Just do me a favor and keep the receipts organized this year." He smiled, a real one, small and brief, and picked up his folder. He wrote the email that same evening. He sat at his kitchen table with his laptop open and a glass of water beside him, and he wrote it the way he did everything that mattered, carefully, without rushing, with complete attention to what belonged and what didn't. No commentary. No anger in the language. No editorializing about Patrick's character or the nature of what he had done, or what kind of man chooses another man's wife for company while signing off on her performance review. Just facts. The dates of the relationship as established by photo metadata. Patrick O'Sea's title. Adrian's division. The documented supervisory adjacent overlap. The performance review, on record, conducted by Patrick during the active period of the relationship. The company policy, which Jerome had looked up and quoted directly, word for word. He read it back once. It was 4 paragraphs. It was accurate. Every sentence was something he could prove. He signed his name, Jerome Whitfield. He typed the HR director's email address into the recipient field. Darius had found it without difficulty, and he moved the cursor to the send button. He sat there for a moment, not with hesitation, just with the stillness of a man making sure he was doing the right thing for the right reason. He was not sending it out of rage. He was not sending it to wound. He was sending it because it was true, because it was documentable, and because a man who had sat across a conference table from Jerome's attorney and called Jerome's cell phone to suggest he be gracious about the situation deserved to encounter, at minimum, the factual record of his own conduct. Jerome clicked send. Patrick was placed on administrative leave 4 days later. Jerome learned this from Darius, who had a way of knowing things through channels that Jerome never asked about. The boutique marketing firm, the one Patrick had been quietly funding, the one Adrienne's extracted money was supposed to buy her into, withdrew its association within the week. No announcement, no statement. The firm's social media simply went quiet, and then the website disappeared. Patrick was eventually reinstated, but he came back to a different office, a different title, a different set of responsibilities. The authority he'd had before was gone. Not loudly, not with drama, just redistributed to other people. The way power quietly moves when someone's reputation develops a permanent crack in it. Jerome did not follow any of this closely. Darius told him what was relevant, and Jerome filed it away and moved on, because none of it was the point. The point was the email. The point was the facts, documented and delivered. What happened after that was simply what happened after that. Beverly saw Adrienne outside a coffee shop on a Thursday morning. Adrienne was standing near the door in a camel coat, phone in hand, looking at something on the screen with the tight expression of a person reworking a calculation that isn't resolving. She looked put together, because she always looked put together. But something underneath it was different, smaller. Beverly had heard enough, through enough mutual channels, to understand the shape of what was happening in Patrick's condo. That the warmth of a man who had pursued her so deliberately had a different quality now that she was fully available. That being someone's choice when you belong to someone else and being someone's choice when you belong to no one were, it turned out, not the same thing. Beverly didn't slow down. She just said, as she passed, "I hope you found what you were looking for." She didn't wait for a response. Jerome came home that evening to a quiet house. He cooked in his kitchen. Nothing complicated, just something warm, something that used the good pan he'd had for 10 years, and the cutting board he'd made himself from a piece of reclaimed oak. He moved around the space without thinking too hard about it, the way you move through a place that belongs to you in your bones. He ate at his own table. The house was quiet around him, entirely his. His walls, his floors, his silence. The chair across from him was empty. He looked at it once, plainly, without flinching. He did not feel the absence as a wound anymore. He felt it as space. The paint was a shade darker than the original. Jerome had chosen it deliberately. Not dramatically different, just richer, a little more settled, like the house had grown more confident in itself. He'd done the trim in clean white and spent 2 weekends on the garden bed along the front walk, turning the soil himself, planting things that would come back every year without being asked to. He stood on the porch now with his coffee, watching the early morning light come across the yard. It was the kind of quiet that belonged to people who had earned it, not empty, not lonely, just still. He had been up since 5:30. That was a running morning, and he had already been out and back, 3 miles through the neighborhood, the same route he used to run before the marriage quietly absorbed that part of him too, the way it had absorbed other things he hadn't noticed losing until they were gone. He was up to 4 miles most days. His body had remembered faster than he expected. He took a slow sip of coffee and looked at the garden bed. The hostas along the edge were doing well. The black-eyed Susans he'd planted in the back corner were coming in stronger than the tag had promised. His phone buzzed on the porch railing. A message from Marcus, his site foreman, confirming the crew's start time on the municipal job. Jerome typed back a single word, "Good," and set the phone face down. The municipal contract had come through 5 months ago. After 2 years of submitting bids, building relationships, showing up to every pre-bid meeting even when he knew the odds were long. It was the largest contract in his company's history. A 3-phase infrastructure upgrade for the city's eastern corridor. The kind of work that put a business in a different category than it had been before. He'd hired 2 new crew members in October to handle the load, both of them solid. Marcus had vouched for one, and Jerome had interviewed the other himself, twice, before making the call. His finances were the cleanest they had ever been. Phyllis had said as much at their last quarterly meeting, with the particular satisfaction of an accountant whose client has finally stopped making her job complicated. Jerome breathed in the morning air and didn't think about any of it too hard. That was the thing he had figured out. Not to grip the good things so tight that you wore yourself out holding on. Just let them be what they were. Sunday dinners at Gloria's had found their rhythm again. For a while after the divorce, he had gone and sat at her table and eaten her food and answered her questions, and underneath all of it was a weight he carried through the door with him and carried back out. He hadn't said anything about it. Gloria hadn't pressed. She had just kept cooking, and kept setting his place, and kept refilling his glass. And eventually, gradually, without a specific moment he could point to, the weight had stopped coming with him. Now he just went to dinner. He arrived early sometimes and helped her in the kitchen. He stayed late and washed dishes while she sat at the table and told him things about the neighborhood, about her garden, about her former students who still called her after all these years. He laughed at her stories. He told her about the job sites, about the new guys, about things that had gone wrong and how he had fixed them. Darius was usually there too, eating more than anyone and asking questions about investment properties between bites. Jerome had started walking him through the basics, how to evaluate a neighborhood's trajectory, how to read a cap rate, what to look for in a building's bones before you let yourself get interested in the numbers. Darius was a quick study. He always had been. He asked the right questions, which Jerome had learned long ago was rarer than most people realized. Last Sunday, Darius had pulled out a listing on his phone, a duplex 2 miles from Gloria's house, and slid it across the table without saying anything. Jerome had picked it up, looked at the photos, looked at the price, looked at the neighborhood on the map. "Foundation?" Darius had asked. Jerome had said, "That's the first thing we'd check." Darius had nodded, Like that was exactly the answer he'd been waiting for. Jerome finished his coffee. He turned and looked at the front of the house. The painted siding, the clean trim, the door he had hung himself 12 years ago and rehung after a hard winter warped the frame. The garden bed with its new green pushing up through dark soil. He heard footsteps on the sidewalk. His neighbor from 3 houses down, an older man named Curtis, retired, who walked every morning with a cane and a small dog who ignored the cane and went wherever he wanted. Curtis stopped at the edge of Jerome's front walk and looked up at the house. "That paint job," Curtis said, shaking his head slowly. "Place looks brand new. You do all that yourself?" Jerome looked at the house. He looked at the door and the trim and the garden bed and the porch where he was standing. "Most of it," he said. "Some things you just have to do yourself to know they'll hold." Curtis nodded, like that made sense to him. The small dog tugged at the leash. They moved on. Jerome turned, stepped inside, and closed the door behind him. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.